Hi there. We've reached chapter 2 of Dorothy Sayers' collection called Creed or Chaos, a series of essays and articles she wrote back in the 30s and 40s. Chapter 2 is entitled The Triumph of Easter. O Felix culpa, said Augustine of Hippo, rather dangerously with reference to the sin of Adam. O happy guilt that did deserve such and so great a Redeemer. It is difficult, perhaps, to imagine a pronouncement that lays itself more open to misunderstanding. It is the kind of paradox that bishops and clergy are warned to beware of uttering from the pulpit. But then the Bishop of Hippo was a very remarkable bishop indeed, with a courage of his convictions rare in highly placed ecclesiastical persons. If spiritual pastors are to refrain from saying anything that might ever, by any possibility, be misunderstood by anybody, they will end, and as in fact many of them do, by never saying anything worth hearing. Incidentally, this particular brand of timidity is the besetting sin of the good churchman. Not that the church approves it. She knows it of old for a part of the great, sprawling, drowsy, deadly sin of sloth. A sin from which the preachers of fads, schisms, heresies, and Antichrist are most laudably free. The children of this world are not only, as Christ so caustically observed, wiser in their generation than the children of light, they are also more energetic, more stimulating, and bolder. It is always, of course, more amusing to attack than to defend. But good Christian people should have learnt by now that it is best to defend by attacking, seeing that the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force. St. Augustine, anyway, seeing the perpetual problem of sin and evil being brought up and planted like a battery against the Christian position, sallied promptly forth, like the good strategist he was, and spiked its guns with a thanksgiving. The problem of sin and evil is, as everybody knows, one which all religions have to face, especially those that postulate an all-good and all-powerful God. If, we say readily, God is holy and omnipotent, he would interfere and stop all this kind of thing, meaning by this kind of thing, wars, persecutions, cruelties, Hitlerism, Bolshevism, or whatever large issue happens to be distressing our minds at the time. But let us be quite sure that we have really considered the problem in all its aspects. Why doesn't God smite this dictator dead is a question a little remote from us. Why, madam, did he not strike you, dumb and imbecile, before you uttered that baseless and unkind slander the day before yesterday? Or me, before I behaved with such cruel lack of consideration to that well-meaning friend? And why, sir, did he not cause your hand to rot off at the wrist before you signed your name to that dirty little bit of financial trickery? You did not quite mean that? And why not? Your misdeeds and mine are none the less repellent because our opportunities for doing damage are less spectacular than those of some other people. Do you suggest that your doings and mine are too trivial for God to bother about? That cuts both ways, for in that case it would make precious little difference to his creation if he wiped us both out tomorrow. Well, perhaps that is not quite what we meant. We meant, why did God create his universe on these lines at all? Why did he not make us mere puppets, incapable of executing anything but his own pattern of perfection? Some schools of thought assert that he did, that everything we do, including Jew baiting in Germany and our own disgusting rudeness to Aunt Eliza, is rigidly determined for us, and that however much we may dislike the pattern, we can do nothing about it. This is one of those theories that are supposed to free us from the trammels of superstition. It certainly relieves our minds of all responsibility. Unfortunately, it imposes a fresh set of trammels of its own. Also, however much we may believe in it, we seem forced to behave as though we did not. Christians, surprising as it may appear, are not the only people who fail to act up to their creed. For what determinist philosopher, when his breakfast bacon is uneatable, will not blame the free will of the cook like any Christian? To be sure, the philosopher's protest, like his bacon, is predetermined also. That is the silly part of it. Our minds are the material we have to work upon when constructing philosophies, and it seems but an illogical creed whose proof depends on our discarding all the available evidence. The Church, at any rate, says that man's will is free, and that evil is the price we pay for knowledge, particularly the kind of knowledge which we call self-consciousness. It follows that we can, by God's grace, do something about the pattern. Moreover, God himself, says the Church, is doing something about it, with our cooperation, if we choose, in despite of us if we refuse to cooperate, but always steadily working the pattern out. And here we come up against the ultimate question which no theology, no philosophy, no theory of the universe has ever so much as attempted to answer completely. Why should God, if there is a God, create anything, at any time, of any kind at all? That is a real mystery, and probably the only completely insoluble mystery there is. The one person who might be able to give some sort of guess at the answer is the creative artist, and he, of all people in the world, is the least inclined even to ask the question, being accustomed to take all creative activity as its own sufficient justification. But we may all perhaps allow that it is easier to believe the universe to have come into existence for some reason than for no reason at all. The Church asserts that there is a mind which made the universe, and that he made it because he is the sort of mind that takes pleasure in creation, and that if we want to know what the mind of the Creator is, we must look at Christ. In him we shall discover a mind that loved his own creation so completely that he became part of it, suffered with and for it, and made it a sharer in his own glory and a fellow worker with himself in the working out of his own design for it. That is the bold postulate that the Church asks us to accept. So we'll continue this brief essay, The Triumph of Easter, and for now we'll link our attempt to deal with some of the questions that creation and especially suffering bring forth in the minds at least of unbelievers, and I dare say in the mind of many believers too. Why Jesus? And that's one of the questions that Christians, that I would say the 10 objections that Christians are most often thrust at Christians, is the idea that Jesus is exclusively the way to God, is one of the most frequently asked questions. But it's only one of many which involve the very questions that Dorothy Sayers is dealing with here, specifically the role of evil and suffering in the universe. So, Why Jesus is on your screen, and next time Dorothy Sayers takes up the bold postulate that the Church asks us to accept, that Christ was the mind of God incarnate, and therefore all of the answers, such as, if we can access them at all, are in the personality and the person of Christ unfolded, as well as they can be unfolded to us in the fallen world we all inhabit.